Barbecued Christine Brennan from the USA Today once more for her absolutely unintelligent column regarding Penn State. Anything she writes about Penn State is unintelligent because she has a vendetta, and she has an ignorant vendetta since she has never read the Free Report, nor has she read the Thornburg Report. And when we had her on the show about a year ago today, in fact, it was posted on the Penn State page today, or yesterday, that it was a year ago for my epic takedown of her on the air when she hung up. Of course, she hadn't read the Free Report. So John Ziegler from FramingPaterno.com joins us, and John has engaged in a bit of an email battle with her, as I did last year after she hung up on the show. She hung up on us and then accused me of hanging up on her. John, welcome to the show again. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Always good to speak to you.
Always fun. And when you sent me your text of her email exchange with you, I just burst out laughing because you basically put her on the spot, called her out, and asked some simple questions for her to answer, and her response was she answered none of them.
Well, and that's absolutely true, but to me, that wasn't the most remarkable part. And to fully understand just how jaw-dropping this email exchange was, and you can see it for yourself at FramingPaterno.com, I think we need to give your listeners a little bit of context, because this wasn't just, some random emailer to her. She and I used to be very close. As a matter of fact, we kind of sort of dated.
Wait a minute. Briefly. What's kind of sort of dated mean?
I don't know. How much detail do you want?
I don't need any detail, but you dated. So let's just say you dated.
Was there a sexual relation
with that woman? Let's just say you dated.
I would be able to say no to that. However, I did spend the night at her house, and she did actually visit my family on a family vacation, oddly enough, because it was in Virginia, Kingsmill, somewhat near where she lives in D.C.
Well, so I would suspect your family was close to disowning you at that point.
Well, it's funny. This is beside the point, but it's funny. That was actually the end of the romantic element of the relationship, because we all went to dinner, and my brother completely called her out, and rather inappropriately, basically gotten a huge argument with her. For reasons that I don't even remember, but she was rather offended by that. As you know, Kevin, she doesn't take well to disagreement.
No, she does not. No, you either agree with her or you're out.
Right. No, but forget about the pseudo-romantic element of this. I gave her the title for her second figure skating book. I'm the reason why she covers golf, because in 1996, back when Tiger Woods was an amateur and she was covering figure skating, I told her, Christine, there's this guy named Tiger Woods. He's going to be the biggest sports star in the world. You really ought to consider getting into golf and covering it. And she's been doing that ever since. So, we've had a pretty close relationship. Now, we've been out of touch for a few years, and I've not been in touch with her on this Penn State thing because I just knew it would be ugly. And I just couldn't take it anymore after what she wrote about the NCAA reducing the Penn State sanctions. So that was the backdrop for why I reached out to her and emailed her and said, Christine, hey, what the heck's going on here? And to me, the most hilarious and really enlightening and shocking part of this, I don't know if you agree with this, Kevin, was that when she responded the second time and she said, you know what? I'm very comfortable in my position on the Penn State case, not because she knows anything about it or she's researched it or because she knows more than me. She knows that I know my stuff, right? We know ourselves. We know each other very well. She knows I'm not a crackpot. She knows I'm intelligent. She knows I don't talk about stuff that I don't know. And yet, she doesn't rely on facts or anything. She relies on the reality that she has received a lot of praise for her position.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, as if that would let's not let that go, because that's kind of amazing. That a pseudo journalist, a columnist for USA Today, would justify their position not on facts, not on truth, not on research, but on praise from other people who are at least as clueless as she is.
Right.
That's really amazing.
It's tantamount, John, to a lawyer going into the courtroom and trying his case, and people sitting in the courtroom saying, you know what, he's right. So, despite the facts that all the evidence said otherwise, the people in the gallery think he's great and he's right. So he's saying, well, you know what? Then I argued my case perfectly because a bunch of morons who are clueless agreed with me.
Well, yeah, or even more simply, 60 million people or whatever it was voted for Barack Obama twice. So,
right.
I mean,
that's a scary proposition.
I mean, there you go. I mean, the reality is popularity. If popularity, especially in this case, we see popularity in general would not be a valid reason to justify your opinions on a particular subject in general. But in this case in particular, it's invalid because the public has been brainwashed. And so they don't know what the hell they're talking about. We proved that. We did a national scientific poll at framingpaterno.com, which through a reputable outlet, we paid for it. We didn't do the research ourselves. The results were astonishing. People can see that for themselves at framingpaterno.com. And the reality is the public couldn't be less educated on the facts of this case. So that was their first alleged pillar to justify her opinions. The second was, I love this one. She said, and I've also received the amount of hatred from the state of Pennsylvania that I expected. And then she even gives like a smiley face in the email at that point.
Right.
Now this is one of my favorite arguments. This is the inverse of the what I've written is so popular it must be true argument. This is the only people who disagree with me are brainwashed Joe bots. Argument, and this one really infuriates me.
Me too.
I'm not a Penn Stater. I went to Georgetown. I have no love for Scott Paterno and vice versa. That's for sure. Wasn't even a huge Penn State fan, even though I did grow up in Pennsylvania. And so I'm certainly not in this group. But what really bugs me here, and I know you'll agree with this, is that this misconception, and I asked her this in a follow-up email, which of course she did not respond to. I said, so did it ever occur to you, Christine Brennan, that maybe, just maybe, the reason why so many people in Pennsylvania disagree with you is not because they're blinded by their love of Penn State, but because they actually care enough about the issue to find out what the hell actually happened.
Exactly.
And therefore they have the facts to know that you are full of crap. Now, I was much nicer than that,
right?
But that's basically what I said. And of course, there's no response to that. And that, to me, is one of the most critical elements in how this narrative got set. Because that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin. When you have the people, and this drives me crazy, I know it does you too, when you have the people who know the most about the case being deemed to be not credible because they're somehow biased or brainwashed or Joe bots or whatever it is, then that's the last batch of scoundrels right there.
It infuriates me so much. Let me point out some of the evidence to back up what we're saying. She wrote yesterday, no college football program ever behaved worse. First of all, Penn State, there's no evidence whatsoever that Penn State's college football program behaved any way other than perfectly in this entire episode. She says a way of life. She's talking about the Penn State culture, which, by the way, was held up as the prime example for the way to do it by the NCAA and called other schools to a state college to show them how to do it. She says this way of life that had put football far ahead of everything else, including the act of helping the most defenseless among us. She's disgraceful. And then she she says this, though, talking about the Paternos. They want to be forgiven. I've not once heard anyone from the Paterno family ask to be forgiven. I've never heard one person in the Penn State community ask to be forgiven. Not one. True. They want to know the truth.
I think that's absolutely true. And what I find, well, there's so many astonishing things about this, but with regard to her view of the case, and I wrote to her in this email, I said it's almost like she's in a time warp. where it's still November of 2011, and she heard that first story get told. Almost all of it has turned out to be bullcrap. About Mike McQueary witnessing a rape, telling Joe Paterno about a rape, Joe Paterno doing nothing, Penn State covering this up. All of that has been found to be completely absurd and not with any factual basis, and she still thinks we're living in that world. But let me tell you what I think's really happening. because she's not a dumb person. She really is not. She's not dumb.
Well, she's sure acting dumb.
Well, no, but here's what she really is. I think this is there's so many elements that are wrong with the modern news media, Kevin, and let's face it, many of them are dumb, all right? I mean, they are dumb people. They are lazy people. They don't care about the truth. But here's what they do care about. Here's what Christine does care about. I believe, and I've seen her do this in other stories, that she strategically tries to stake out a position that she thinks will be good for her, will get her on television, will make her look good, will help her career, increase her status. You know, when she became a sports writer, it was still a novelty for there to be a female sports writer or reporter. That was her currency. Well, that's long gone now, especially since she's older and, you know, there's 800 hot female sports reporters out there that get a lot more attention than she does. So now she has to work a lot harder to find that real estate so that she can be asked on television and be given credibility by other news outlets. So what she did here was she saw what the NCAA did, and she saw an opening that somebody was going to be the champion of no, we're not going to let Penn State off the hook, knowing that there would be a lot of people in the news media that would find that to be a valid position, and therefore she would get attention for it. I think that's really what was motivating her, and I think, unfortunately, that's what motivates most people in the media. What's going to be good for them? And you know what? That's disgraceful as it is, but the worst part of it is that most of our public doesn't even understand that that's how the game works.
No, I would submit, John, that I would rather be stupid than abuse an innocent group of people to further my self-interest. And so in her case, I think she's the worst of all devils. That I think what you described just a moment ago is exactly correct. And she even says in one of the emails to you, if you read the column, you saw that I'm hopeful about Penn State, but the Corbett suit and the actions of others in the face of the worst scandal in college history certainly gives me pause. Gives you pause for what?
Well, it's funny you picked up on that, because I didn't even understand. I didn't bother to ask her because I knew I wasn't going to get an answer anyway, and I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. But referencing the Corbett suit shows her utter ignorance.
Exactly.
If she thinks that somehow Tom Corbett is on the side of the paternal family in Penn State here, then that is really massive ignorance.
It really is.
About what's going on, because Corbett is on the other side of this. He filed the lawsuit simply as a diversionary tactic to try to salvage his reelection, which isn't going to work.
Exactly.
And for her to not understand that, I think shows. I didn't say that she knew the facts of the case. I said she's not stupid, and I'm positive she doesn't know the facts. And you already exposed that when you destroyed her last year on your show. So, but this is a person. Let's keep in mind here. This is a person who is not only writing for the most popular paper in the country, USA Today, but is respected in the rest of the media world. I mean, she is highly respected and gets asked on other outlets all the time. And this is the reason why I put the email exchange up at framingpaterno.com is not just because it's hilarious, which I think it is.
I think it is too.
I think it's emblematic of so much about how and why it is that the media blew this story. It gives people an insight into how the media really works and why it is that this story has been lost among this sea of distortion and lies and deceit that the media has created for their own self-interest. I find this goes way, way beyond Penn State or Joe Paterno. It's just that this happens to be the worst example of it I've ever seen in my life, and I've spent most of my career on this issue of media malpractice as a documentary filmmaker and a former talk show host and an author and all that. So I think this is really quite extraordinary on a lot of levels. And, and we've seen others, Kevin, try to distort what the NCAA did as somehow an indictment of people like us, which is really... Yeah, you and
I are the bad guy. And, John, I would say this. When you say she's not stupid, I would counter that with this. I believe that lazy people are stupid. And so if you're too lazy to actually read the Free Report and the Thornburg Report, if you're too lazy to investigate the story for yourself before you put your reputation on the line in a publication like USA Today, then I believe you're stupid. And I believe it's not only media malpractice, it's negligence, and it's libel. And in her case, what I loved, though, was your final email. And I'm going to read this to our listeners because you made a great comparison to her book about Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. And you said if after you wrote your book about the Harding-Kerrigan issue, you had come to me and without me having done any investigation on my own, you told me I was dead wrong that Harding was innocent, and I didn't want to hear what info you had to contradict my view because Tanya Harding fans were telling me that I was right. What kind of respect would you have had for my perspective? And no response came.
No response at all. I waited 24 hours. I got no response, and then I released the email. And again, it's important to note, this is an email between two people who used to be rather close, regardless of the romantic element or regard. I mean, we talked a lot. We had a huge influence in each other's life for a couple of year period of time. We respected the heck out of each other, and that's why I wrote that last email. And I fully expected she would not respond because there is no response there that she can give because I have her nailed to the cross. Or that's a bad metaphor, but you understand what I'm saying. One other point about Christine, which I think is important here, which I think shows how different the media looks at this Penn State case. You know, she's a Northwestern grad and grew up as a Michigan fan. So much so, she took her father's ashes and sprinkled them on the Michigan football field. Now, can you imagine, Kevin, how Ohio State University would respond if Christine Brennan, a Northwestern grad and Michigan football fan, had gone on a 2-year-long vendetta against them with that conflict of interest? Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, Ohio State fans would have stormed the offices of USA Today, and Christine Brennan would probably have been fired or at least taken off the story. But because the rest of the media has so chastened everybody from Penn State into fear of fighting back or being seen as not getting it on child molestation or whatever, everyone has to sit on their hands and not mention these types of things. Now, I'm not suggesting that she's doing this vendetta because she's a Michigan fan and because she went to Northwestern, but do you not agree with me that Ohio State fans would have reacted differently?
They would have marched on the USA Today's office is what they would have done. And John, here's the other thing, and I pointed this out yesterday on my show. She's, in my opinion, so stupid that she doesn't pay attention to her own publication because she writes in her column that she's tired of Jay Paterno whining. I haven't heard Jay Paterno whine yet, and in fact, Jay Paterno tweeted after the NCAA had reduced the penalties, NCAA gives back some Penn State scholarships. Why not all? Any football sanctions are still an affront to the truth. By any definition, is that whining?
No, well, you see, you're not allowed to fight back. And see, that's what, in her definition here, is whining. You know, if you fight back at all, you're whining. I mean, I got this when, it's funny you say that word, because, you know, when I did the interview with Sarah Palin after the 2008 election, you know, only interview she ever did extensively about the election and certainly about the media coverage, which I used for a film I did called Media Malpractice, that was what everyone claimed was happening there, that Sarah Palin was whining because she was trying to tell the truth of having been absolutely destroyed during a presidential election. So you're not even, if you're Jay Paterno, you're not even allowed to say anything because you're just supposed to take it and forget about the fact that you know exponentially about more about the story than Christine Brennan does. That's for sure. You lived it. It was your father. You were an assistant coach. You were there. You know Mike McQuittery. I mean, it's the theater of the absurd.
John, how, after all the years that you studied this, and I don't mean the Penn State story, I mean the media, and I'm asking myself the same question every day. How in the world can a publication like USA Today employ someone like this who is so obviously prejudicial without any knowledge? I mean, as I said, and I posted this, Mike Wallace and Walter Cronkite must be rolling over in their graves when they read this kind of crap that passes for quote-unquote truth.
Well, it actually goes to what she said. she gave you the answer. She gets praised. I guarantee at USA Today they're praising her. Because here's why: because no one, and I have found this time and time again over the last year and a half on this Penn State story. As I have said this numerous times, they don't even know enough to understand what they don't know. They don't understand not only that she's dead wrong, they don't even understand that there's another completely credible side to the story, because there's been so much brainwashing, and frankly, I think so many PR mistakes have been made by people like Scott Paterno that they don't even get that she's wrong, because they've stopped. You see, and I wrote about this at framingpaterno.com, all the bombshells that have gone off since the story broke that should have changed the narrative. Again, you can see it at framingpaterno.com. It's about 9,000 words. If you're interested in the story, I think it's fascinating stuff. But see, people at USA Today, they don't know about any of these things. The editors who are making these decisions, they're completely shut off because they think the story is over. It's known. There's nothing new to it. They've got the narrative that they like, and they've moved on. And there's a lot of reasons why this has happened, Kevin. I believe that the reason why the news media has changed fundamentally is because of fragmentation. Fragmentation destroyed the economic business model of all media outlets, which meant that instead of being journalistic organizations, they had to fight tooth and nail for every dime, every crumb, every financial element they could possibly get. Well, that's inherently contradictory to the journalistic mission. So because of fragmentation, because newspapers are now struggling to survive and every TV station has to fight for 1/10 of a rating point, guess what happens? Journalism is tough. Journalism takes time. It takes money. It takes work, effort, intelligence, judgment. All these things are pushed aside, and all we care about is what is it, that's going to happen tomorrow with some celebrity. That's it. And we don't care about substantive issues, and this is a very complex story. It is too complex for the average person in general, and certainly too complex for the average media person. So it's a somewhat complicated situation, but when you break it down, it really isn't. That's why the media is broken, and we have seen it come to fruition in this Penn State Sandusky story more so than in any other story I've covered, and it dwarfs even the 2008 election, which was something I thought we'd never see again. But I think we did, only worse, with what happened to Penn State Joe Paterno.
John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com visiting with us. John, do you believe, as I do, that the sole reason that the NCAA has reduced some of the penalties here with regard to scholarships is because of the lawsuit that is now pending in front of a Pennsylvania judge and that will require discovery, and the NCAA is trying to, in my opinion, make themselves a more friendly NCAA so that they don't get barbecued in a lawsuit when discovery is inevitably allowed?
I think that that's absolutely part of this. I think if they didn't believe that the Paterno, for instance, if they didn't believe that the Paterno lawsuit was going to have standing, I don't think they would have done this. So that is the gun, if you will, that is forcing their hand. However, and I'm curious if you agree with me on this, I think that there's a little bit more nefarious element going on here. And that is this. I think that what the NCAA is trying to do is I think they're trying to take the wind out of the Paterno lawsuit's sails politically at home in State College at Penn State. Let me tell you what I mean by this. I think what they're trying to do is to do two things. Take away all of the current football elements of the sanctions, right? As well as put the carrot out there of, well, if you continue to behave well, we're going to lift the bowl ban sooner. So you'll be able to go to, some crappy third-rate bowl next year because we've destroyed you with the sanctions if you continue to behave. Well, what's that going to do politically? Politically, that I think they believe, although I'm not sure this is a correct calculation on their part, I think they believe that's going to put pressure on people at Penn State for saying, well, wait a minute, okay, Paterno's, can you please drop this thing? The NCAA is willing to help us here and give us a lighter sentence for good behavior. We need to shut up. And I think this is going to go all the way to the Board of Trustees, where the pro-Paterno members, some of whom are actually named in that lawsuit as plaintiffs on behalf of the Paterno family, I think they're going to get pressure to drop themselves from that lawsuit. Whether they will do it or not, I don't know. But do you see where I'm heading with this? Where I think they're trying to paint the Paternos into a corner politically by taking away elements of this that have nothing to do with the Paternos. You follow me?
I do, and I do believe that there's an element of that at work here. However, I don't think anyone in the Penn State camp or any one of the potential plaintiffs in this lawsuit is going to be deterred by the NCAA acting as though they're a friendly older brother.
Oh, no, I didn't say it was going to work. I said I think that's the intention. And you got to remember, Bill O'Brien, the current head football coach at Penn State, has already, not so subtly, implied that he would be on board with that kind of a concept. That we got to shut up. The NCAA looks like they're willing to play ball with us. And, I think that with some people, that's going to resonate. Now, with the people that matter, I don't know. I certainly with the people who have been supportive of me, I haven't found anybody at all who is deterred in the last 48 hours. In fact, if anything, I think it's built momentum on our side because now people realize that, that there's light at the end of the tunnel and that obviously we're making some progress here. So I think the NCAA, shockingly, might have miscalculated. I'm just saying that was their intention and that it is an issue. I do think that there's going to be some pressure put on the Paterno family within Penn State, within the community of Penn State, to say, hey, guys, can't we put this aside? You're hurting us. We could go to a bowl game next year. I think that will be an issue. I don't think it will win the day, but I do think it's relevant.
I think it's relevant, too, and I think you're right about Bill O'Brien. I think Bill O'Brien, while he doesn't have to act like a candy ass, is acting like a candy ass. He ought to just he really ought to just keep his mouth shut, be grateful that he has the scholarships and say that he's grateful he has the scholarships and let it drop. But anyone who thinks that the Paterno suit and is joined by faculty members and board of trustee members shouldn't go forward, and if that is truly Bill O'Brien's feeling, then he is a laughing stock as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know that that's his feeling. But anyone who feels that way doesn't care about finding out the truth, doesn't care about justice, doesn't care about making the record correct.
Well, I agree with that last part 100%. As far as Bill O'Brien, look, he's in a really tough spot. I think we need to acknowledge that. I mean, it's almost a no-win situation. And I don't know that,
John, I don't know if I agree with that. I think he's in the catbird seat, and here's why. He's come into a very difficult situation, and all he can do is look good. If it goes south, he says, well, you know what? Look what the NCAA did to me. They hamstrung me.
Right.
If it goes well, he says, look how great I am.
No, football-wise, I totally agree with you there. And in fact, I actually think football-wise, the worst thing that could have ever happened to Bill O'Brien was when they went 8-4 last year. Because I think that created expectations that were completely out of line with reality, especially if the sanctions had not been lifted. I mean, I think if the sanctions had not been reduced, and let's make it clear, as of today, they're still rather substantial. But had the original sanctions stayed, I think that in 3 or 4 years, Penn State would have been struggling to win 4 games. I really do. I think O'Brien's career, had he stayed, would have been in big trouble because of that, because he created expectations that were out of control. But I'm talking politically. I think politically, I think he's in a very difficult situation. Now, look, if it was me or you, would we have gone in there and said, you know what, this is bullcrap? The Paterno got screwed, and I'm with the crowd that says, let's fight for the truth. Absolutely, but if you look at it from his perspective, I can at least understand where he's coming from. I agree with you that if you look at it as a pendulum, he has definitely been too much on the move on side. I'm just trying to be realistic and look at it from his perspective. And politically, he is in a tough spot. But I agree, football wise, you're right. Total catbird seat. He can't lose.
Yeah, he cannot lose. And I can't wait for the end of the October month to hear the judge's ruling. And from what I understand of the judge, John, I don't know if you've done any research into his background, and I have a little bit, that he is, while he's not a mouthpiece for Penn State, he is certainly not anti-Penn State. And he is a judge that apparently is a fair and honest guy. And if he's a fair and honest guy who doesn't have any axe to grind against Penn State, he is going to rule that somebody in this group has standing. Most likely the Paternos, and this lawsuit is going to go forward, and there's going to be discovery, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
I certainly hope you're right. I mean, that would be fantastic. It certainly would not be in keeping with the rest of this case where justice is lost at almost every single...
It would be an upset.
Yeah, it would be an upset. It would be the first time this has happened. I'm not enough of a legal expert to know. I mean, my gut tells me that from a standing perspective, I would feel more comfortable if Penn State itself had been named in the lawsuit. I certainly do believe that of all the parties, the Paternos clearly have standing. It's interesting to note, you probably remember this, Kevin, because you have a very good memory. When Franco Harris and I confronted Mark Emmert from the NCAA president at the end of last year in audio that you can hear for yourself at our exclusive video section of framingpaterno.com, Emmert claimed that Joe Paterno was not mentioned in the consent decree. And I didn't have it in front of me, so I thought, is that possible? I mean, he can't be lying, right? I thought maybe there was maybe technically he was correct. He was just kind of creating a misimpression. And I went home and I'm like, wait a minute, it's right there. It specifically says that Joe Paterno's record will be changed because of the sanctions in the consent decree. So, to me, how in the world the Paterno family doesn't have standing just simply because of that is beyond me. And the fact that Emmert didn't know or was willing to lie about that, I thought was very telling, because I thought, my gut tells me, wow, he's really afraid of a lawsuit here.
And clearly, John, he was willing to lie, because no one can make the argument that he didn't know. It was his supervision of this consent decree that took place. So, of course, he knew. And you would think, but I got to tell you, Kevin, I'm now convinced that he didn't have a clue what he was doing. You got to remember, this is the same guy who thought Franco Harris might have played on the 1998 Penn State team. He said that in that audio. Well,
I guarantee
that's a little different, though, than knowing. As absurd as that is different. Makes him live in a time warp, but that's still different than issuing a consent decree and agreeing to it and not knowing what was in it. It doesn't hold any common sense by any standard.
I would have agreed with you totally before I saw Mark Emmert. This guy is a buffoon. I mean, he had no idea. I am positive that he thinks that Jerry Sandusky got away with a rape in 1998 and kept raping that boy for another 12 years before he finally got stopped. I'm positive he thinks that. That's how clueless he is about what really happened here.
And John, the next time you email Christine Brennan, you might point out to her, why haven't you written a column about the career of Mark Emmert, which is tainted, tainted as a compliment, tainted at every stop in his career by academic fraud, by administrative fraud. I mean, how in the world this guy became the head of the NCAA is laughable, and yet no one but you and me point this out. And let me remind you, by the way, with regard to Penn State being named in this lawsuit, the plaintiffs can always amend the petition, and they can amend the petition to add other defendants. And I would believe that the attorneys in this lawsuit who filed it are aware that if they get an inkling from this judge that but for the absence of Penn State as a named defendant, this lawsuit would go forward, Penn State will be named.
Well, it sounds like you know a heck of a lot more about that than I do, and I certainly hope you're right. As far as emailing Christine, I doubt that she would do anything that I suggest to her, unless, of course, she thought it might get her on television.
Well, that would get her on television if she writes a column anti-Mark Emmert. Somebody would have her on television.
Well, I'll get right on that, Kevin.
Well, John, as always, spectacular stuff. Thanks for the email exchange, which, by the way, everyone can read at framingpaterno.com. It's just a never-ending scenario. I, for one, I have to admit to you that I was stunned by the NCAA's reduction of the penalties, and yet, of course, it all makes sense. The judge is getting ready to rule on this in terms of standing in late October. The NCAA is getting out ahead of it, acting as though somehow they're a kinder, friendlier, nicer NCAA.
Well, just to add to that, though, I think a large part of this was they were rewarding Penn State for doing such a great job of pleading guilty to crimes that they didn't commit and not making the NCAA look foolish for having charged them with crimes that they didn't commit. I do think that that's an important part of this story that needs to at least be mentioned.
I agree with you. And by the way, don't you love how they use George Mitchell as some integrity athletic monitor, whatever that is? And my question after looking at all of this was, now wait a minute. What exactly has Penn State done differently than they did in all the paternal years? No one's pointed that out, of course.
Yeah. Well, apparently, they've done a really good job of keeping Jerry Sandusky off campus.
With an assist from the judicial system.
Exactly. I can assure you, having visited him in prison, he's coming nowhere near State College anytime soon.
And so for that, Penn State, you get to go to a bowl game.
There you go. Strange world we live in, Kevin.
It is, John. Thank you so much. We appreciate it as always.
Take care. Bye-bye.
John Ziegler from FramingPaterno.com. We're at John.